Chapter 7 Dungeon of Despair by Jackdaw Tando. It was absolutely ghastly. The most horrific experience of my entire life. I shall never forget those dreadful 2 days in Grukenulcus. They were the stuff of nightmares, utterly horrendous. The worst 2 days I can ever remember. A cold wave of icy terror ripples down my spine even as I recall them. I don't know how I survived. It was ghastly. It all started when I woke up in a cold, damp cell. I wasn't even lying on a bed. I was flat on the hard stone floor, soaked to the skin, and desperately uncomfortable. The first thing I saw was a big black rat lying dead on the floor beside me. I squirmed in horror. I tried to sit up, but every joint in my body was aching unbearably. I discovered that I was in heavy iron chains and had very little room to move. A cold draught was blowing through the iron bars of the cell door and making me shiver uncontrollably. What a terrible place this was! What in Ganvor had happened? The last thing I could remember was being on a boat fighting some pirates. I must have been knocked unconscious. Had they beaten us? Were we imprisoned in some secret lair of theirs? What was going to happen to us? Would we be sold as slaves? Tortured cruelly? Left to rot? I began to feel a mighty raging hunger. How long had I been unconscious? I could have been out for days. As all these thoughts were buzzing through my mind, I noticed that there were other figures chained up in the cell. As my eyes grew accustomed to the dark, I began to recognize them all. In the corner opposite me was Phoenix Algothian, a short, chubby fellow with masses of curly brown hair, a bright red face, and a nose of notable size. He was wrapped up in his long red and yellow scarf, and appeared to be holding something long and scaly in his hands. Next to him was Robin Hectus, a young lad from Rowendale with frizzy yellow hair, shining eyes, and a constant smile. He had a thick blue woolen jumper to keep him warm, and seemed to be chewing on a toffee. In the far corner of the cell sat Ramkarn Sebaniah, a sombre Baromium with grave grey eyes, a solemn expression, and long blonde locks. He was wearing a stolen enemy uniform, which by now was somewhat ripped and ruffled. He looked as though he were deep in thought. Sleeping by the window was a gruff innkeeper named Kestrel MacFiber. He's a crusty fellow with a small grey beard, neatly combed hair, and stern eyebrows. His grubby black jacket was torn in several places, and he had a nasty bruise on his left cheek.
"Good morning, Tando," said Algothian. "Welcome back to the land of the living."
"Where are we?" I asked. "What's happened to us?"
"Grukenulcus," answered Algothian. "The castle of Barracus. We're back in the hands of the enemy, I'm afraid."
"The pirates hand us over, did they?" I asked.
"No," said Algothian. "We beat the pirates. It was Mr. Gonfaro. He was deceiving us all along. A platoon of Grochukans was waiting for us on the northern coast."
"Rotten traitor," I sneered. "So our escape is at an end. What a miserable failure. We're worse off than when we started."
"We may only be here temporarily," said Algothian. "When I first got captured I was put in a cell like this. Perhaps we'll be taken back to Grukengolga."
"I doubt it," I replied. "We'll be left here to starve, no doubt. They wouldn't waste manpower taking us back to Golga. Where are the others?"
"The cell next door," said Algothian. "We could hear them all talking last night."
"How long have I been here, then?" I asked.
"Not long," said Algothian. "We got here yesterday evening. It's about the 6th hour now." "Lunchtime soon, I hope," said Hectus. "I'm so hungry I could eat an elephant."
"No guarantee they'll serve us anything," I said. "Even if they do, it'll be gludge soup as like as not. What a ghastly future we face." I laid back my head against the damp stone wall and began to sink into despair. What a hideous experience this war has been so far. I've been forced to leave home and join the army, and sail across the sea, and fight in battles, and camp under the stars, and face constant danger, with no comforts, no proper warmth, and no decent food for months. I've been thrown into Golga, that infamous citadel of evil, and been racked with fear, worries, and anxieties beyond belief. I've been down a vile, stinking drain, chased through a forest, cramped up in a rubbish cart, almost killed by venomous bats, attacked by pirates, and now chained up in a horrible, dingy dungeon. I'll probably be here for the rest of my miserable life, cold and hungry and aching and in pain, surrounded by rats and mice and spiders and I don't know what. The chances are I'll be tortured by the guards, subjected to shocking indignity, and condemned to some grisly, lingering, agonizing death. What an appallingly terrible lot has fallen upon me. "Is it lunch-time yet?" groaned the distinctive voice of McFiber, waking from his sleep.
"I expect we'll get something soon," said Algothian. "I'm sure they're going to feed us, or they might as well have killed us."
"They will be feeding us all right," said Ramkhan. "Baracus will be wanting us fit and healthy for his experiments." "Experiments?" I said, not entirely sure whether I really wanted Ramkhan to elaborate. "Baracus is conducting an investigation into human strength and endurance," explained Ramkhan. "Physical, mental, and emotional torments, and their effect upon human subjects. He'll be exposing us to exhaustion, terror, heat, pressure, pain, disease, confinement, hallucinations, extreme cold, and countless other horrors. Then he'll be noting the results and using them for his own malevolent ends." "Well, that's cheered me up no end," I said. "I'd have been better off staying unconscious."
"How do you know so much about him?" asked Algothian.
"I have been through it all before," said Ramkhan, looking down at the ground. "I was at Golga long before you lot are arriving. I was a victim in the first batch of experiments. But Baracus was never getting to finish his studies. Not until now. Now he is having his very own castle, and a whole host of servants at his beck and call."
"You never know,"
said Algothian, attempting a smile.
"Maybe we'll get lucky again. Maybe we'll get out of here. We got out of Golga, didn't we?"
"I don't think you understand," said McFiber, shaking his head.
"Hasn't it sunk in yet? We didn't escape from Golga. We weren't as lucky as we thought. We'll never get out of this terrible place. Don't you realize who Baracus is? Haven't you put it all together yet?"
As McFiber was speaking, a guard appeared at the cell door. He drew out an enormous bunch of keys and started unlocking the door. I dreaded to think where he might be taking us. Into one of the torture chambers, perhaps? Into some unspeakable pit of horrors? The actual answer came as a gigantic relief.
"Rise and shine,"
he said with a smile.
"It's time to dine."
As soon as he'd unshackled us, we were taken to a spacious underground chamber filled with long wooden tables. Each wall was lined with silent stationary guards, all carrying glimmering swords and vicious clubs. Security seemed to be somewhat tighter than at Golga. There were about 50 prisoners already in the room, among them General Montagolin and our other companions. The food was already laid on the tables. It looked like discoloured mashed potato and scraps of assorted meat. We were directed over to the general's table, seated on uncomfortable benches, and had our ankles chained to the floor. Escape did not seem a very likely prospect.
"Afternoon, men," said the general.
I trust you're all well rested.
As much as can be expected, said McFiber.
There's no denying we're in a dire situation, said the General, but we mustn't fall victim to despair. There must be a way out of here.
I'm not sure about that,
said Quilk, a businessman.
This place ain't half secure. Loads of guards, loads of locks, and not a single drain in sight.
Let's face it, gentlemen, I said. We're stuck in here for life.
We should have stayed in Golga,
said Gevins, a postman. "Least we had a bit more comfort there. Fresh air, clean beds, no chains."
"I knew we shouldn't have trusted that Gonforo," said Volko the Marjorian. "Never trust a flatterer. That's what my father always said."
"You're not a very good judge of character, are you, General?" said Slank, the General's butler. "You trust villains, and take your loyal servants for killers."
"You have my deepest and sincerest apologies, my dear Slank," said the General. "I cannot tell you how sorry I am for my deplorable mistake. How can you ever forgive me?"
This was very uncharacteristic of the General. I've never heard him apologise before. Normally he would bawl and shout at its butler as though he were a dog. Why was he being so meek and humble?
"Look out," said Quilk. "Guard approaching."
"Good afternoon, gentlemen," said the guard. "I have a message for you all. Mr. Barracus has requested to see you in his office after lunch."
"Requested?" said the General. "Have we any choice in the matter?"
"Not really," said the guard. "But Mr. Barracus always likes to treat his prisoners with courtesy and respect."
"Perhaps he should give us some beds then," said Quilk, "and a nice warm blanket or two. And how about some decent grub? This meat ain't fit for a maggot."
"You must be Mr. Quilk," said the guard. "Barracus has told me all about you. It'll be very interesting to see how you fare in your trial. I think he's got the freezer lined up for you, one of my favourites. Maybe that'll silence your tongue. Anyway, I'll be waiting for you all on the way out. Eat up, gentlemen. You've barely touched your food. You won't be getting any more until tomorrow. Make the most of it, gentlemen."
Somehow or other, the prospect of meeting Barracus made me lose my appetite entirely. We were about to come face to face with the most notorious torturer in the Empire. I began to wonder what type of trial might be appointed for me. Left in total darkness for a month, perhaps, thrown into a pit of snakes, forced to fight a ferocious wild animal, I was sure that all my worst nightmares would come true. Time passed slowly, but at length we were released from our ankle chains and taken out of the chamber.
"Follow me, gentlemen,"
said the guard.
"What an honour awaits you! An audience with Mr. Barracus himself. How privileged you are!"
The guard began to lead us away to our fate, taking us through many dark corridors and gloomy chambers and up long spiral staircases, until eventually we came to a bright silver door with a distinctive black handle. The guard knocked softly upon the door.
"Come in,"
said a voice, strangely familiar. The guard opened the door and directed us all inside. I entered the room, and stared and blinked and gazed in wonder. Sitting behind the desk, alive and well and fighting fit, was our old friend Merlin Rhombus.
"Greetings, my friends," he smiled. "Delighted to see you all again. 10 of you at any rate. A shame about poor Jackals. Do sit down, my friends. Make yourselves comfortable."
We all meekly obeyed and sat there quietly, wondering what in Ganvo was going to happen next.
"It seems I've got quite a lot of explaining to do," said Rhombus. "Where shall I begin? I suppose I'd better start by introducing myself. Properly, I mean. My name is Barracus of Kendum, loyal servant of the Emperor Morbrond, and chief spy of His Royal Highness the Prince. I'm afraid your whole escape has been a complete and utter farce, my friends. It's all been part of a most ingenious and masterly plan."
I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was completely shocked, dazed, and astonished.
"At present," he continued, "I am undertaking a most vital and critical investigation. I am seeking to perfect the art of torture, with a view to creating a foolproof and infallible programme of mind-washing. I am convinced that through the careful application of different methods of torment, physical, mental, and emotional, it is possible to turn any human subject into a permanent mindless slave. At first, I thought it would be pretty easy to perfect the procedure, but humans are all so infuriatingly different. There are introverts and extroverts, heroes and cowards, optimists and pessimists, realists and idealists, intellectuals and practicals, self-lovers and self-loathers. Such a vast array of fascinating characteristics. Different people, I have discovered, respond to different torments. Consequently, to find the right method for the right person, you need to study them first. You need to assess them thoroughly, my dear friends. Watch them, observe them, scrutinize them, analyze them, get under their skin. And you know the best way to do that, my friends? You have to become one of them. You have to get alongside them, befriend them, and see them as they really are. You have to build up a complete and accurate profile of each prospective subject. And that, my good friends, is what I have been up to these last few weeks. You, gentlemen, are my honoured panel of subjects.
I couldn't get my head around what Rumbus was saying. Had the whole of our escape been planned and engineered by the Growchukans? Was it all one big elaborate sham?
Consider your escape, my friends,
continued Mr. Rumbus, or perhaps I should call him Barracus.
Wasn't it all rather easy? Didn't it all come together rather too conveniently? You should have listened to MacFiber. He seemed to sense that something was going on. Let me explain my whole story, my friends. It all started when Prince Vorkrond agreed to reopen my torture experiments. He gave me this lovely castle here and supplied me with a smashing team of servants. When we heard that a Galamine general had been captured, we decided to make him our prime target. What a prize if we could successfully manipulate him to our own glorious ends. Consequently, I returned to Gruchengolga and decided to pose as a prisoner. I cleared it all with Vorkrond, of course. Most of the guards were in on it. I turned myself into Mr. Merlin Rhombus, the charming Galamine gentleman, and had myself put onto a boat with Mr. Algothian, Tando, and Volko, and I was taken along to Gruchengolga. It looked more realistic that way, you see. It was much better than me arriving all on my own. We met young Hectus, and then I finally got to see the general. The plan was underway.
"You absolute scoundrel!"
shouted the general, unable to keep his cool any longer.
"Manners, General, manners," said Barracus. "It was nothing personal, my friend. We're just fighting a war, that's all. Anyway, we chose the drain as the easiest way of escape, and decided to use cleaning the dining hut as a punishment. We left the room unguarded, of course. What an irresistible opportunity for you. We knew it would get back to the general. The rest was easy enough. We planted some duplicate keys in Vorkrond's tower, and found an excuse to put young Quilk in Temptation's path. We knew it wouldn't be long before you attempted an escape. All the guards were kept up to date. That's why no one came after you. That's how we got past that fellow in the tower. Out we went into the forest, and our wonderful journey began." "Why didn't you just take us straight here?" asked Algothian. "Study, my friend," replied Barracus. "The journey here to Gruchenulcus gave me the perfect opportunity to study you all. That's why I kept a journal. I had to be careful what I wrote, mind. Didn't want one of you lot uncovering me. There were risks, of course. Ordinary soldiers didn't know of the plan. I could have been killed by my own countrymen. And there were a couple of worrying moments along the way. Remember the Alka? Specially trained to hunt down Growchukans. Went straight for me, didn't it? And that Tromine king could see I wasn't a Galamine. Talking of Tromines, I nearly slipped up there, didn't I, Slank? Said I'd never seen a Tromine before. I didn't realise they were so common in Galamenia. An unforgivable error. Then came the bumbling interference of Mr. Clestus. He nearly messed the whole thing up. He was the man on the grey horse, sent by Vorkrond to keep an eye on me. Charming. What little confidence he has in me. He nearly gave the game away. Saving us from that chariot, indeed. Made you all curious. It got MacFiber's brain working overtime. Made me feel quite uncomfortable."
"What about your death?" asked Gevins. "I don't see where that comes in."
"Ah," said Barracus with a smile. "Not part of my original plan, I must admit. I had intended to stay with you all the way here, Mr. MacFiber put pay to that. I felt he was getting rather too close to discovering the truth. I couldn't afford to stick around any longer. I had to throw him off the scent. What better way than by dying? Poor Mr. Rhombus. Kind, courteous, friendly Mr. Rhombus. I knew you'd still be carrying on in the rough direction of Ulcus, so I wrenched off the wagon brake, set it rolling down the hill, and made a run for it. Did any of you actually see me in the wagon? Of course you didn't. It worked like a treat. Off I went into Kendom and caught up with the Emperor. I was a little annoyed at having to cut my studies short, but I had a good few days among you. I hired a cart and drove myself off to Stavros as quickly as I could. I found a copperless sailor from Hevronesia, our friend Mr. Gonforo, and convinced him to take you over the sea. Then I went out to look for you. Yes, I was Ralkov, too. I enjoyed playing that one. Ralkov the pilot, gallant hero of the Air Force. It didn't take me long to find you. Then I had a bit of fun along the way. I slipped the wagon brake into Slank's bag, didn't I? I do apologise, Mr. Slank. I'm afraid I couldn't resist. I wanted to know how you'd all react. For shame, General. Poor innocent Mr. Slank. You don't have much faith in him, do you? I am sorry, Mr. Slank. It was unforgivable of me. Anyway, I brought you all back to Stavros, handed you over to old Mr. Gonforo, and hurried over here to get everything ready. I'm sorry you lost the professor on the way. He'd have made an interesting subject. Gonforo tells me he's a Halvirandus. Well, 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 he could have taught me some tricks. What a shame. Anyway, gentlemen, I do hope I'm not boring you. You don't want to listen to me jabbering away all day, do you? Forgive me, my friends. I still don't understand what it is you want to do with us, said Algorian. It's the General I want, really, said Barracus. No disrespect to the rest of you. You'll be very useful studies. But the General has access to your Queen. That's what I'm interested in. Let me be perfectly frank with you, gentlemen. The war is not exactly going our way at the moment. We're rather anxious, in actual fact. Conquering Galliminia would have been easy enough, but we didn't anticipate your neighbours joining in. Who'd have thought it? Marduria comes to the aid of the Gallimines. Wonders never cease. What with Boromir as well, we're not all that sure that we can beat you all. We've already been forced back across the sea, and your air force is inflicting some humiliating damage. The last thing we want is for Kendom to be captured. Can you imagine it? Queen Hivernia sitting on the throne of the Emperor and dictating the terms of peace. It doesn't bear thinking about. Quite out of the question, my friends. No, you have to be stopped. Force of arms isn't going to do it. Not yet, at any rate. We need another strategy. The key to your downfall is the Queen. What power she has. Head of your army, head of your council, head of your law courts. She can do whatever she pleases. Now imagine if I could get hold of her, gentlemen. Imagine I could make her a slave to my will and have her at my beck and call. I could cripple you, my friends, destroy you. Now I'm sure you'll agree it's no easy task getting access to the lovely Mrs. Hivernia, but not for you, General. You're a cherished friend of yours, I understand. So if I can break you, my friend, and make you putty in my hands, I in turn can break the Queen. I can unleash my deadly talents upon her. I can be master of her mind and controller of her heart. Can you imagine the potential? The war would be over. I could make her withdraw all your forces and surrender. She would hand Galliminia over to me. Wouldn't that be marvellous? Don't look at me with such contempt, my friends. You can hardly blame me. I've got a war to win. It's a rather wonderful plan, don't you think? Galliminia will fall, and you, General Lord Montagolin, will be the engineer.
So what have you brought us all in here for, then? Asked the General. Do you just want to gloat?
By no means, General, exclaimed Barracus. I just wanted to satisfy your curiosity. You deserve to know what's going to happen to you. I don't want to keep you in the dark. You're a cracking bunch, really. It's good to see you all again. Any more questions?
You'll never break us, cried the General in defiance. You may well crush our bodies, but you will never conquer our hearts.
That we shall see, said Barracus. Maybe you're right, and maybe you're not. There's only one way to find out. Now you'll be pleased to know that we're delaying testing until tomorrow. You can have the rest of the day to relax and unwind. You've had a very trying few weeks. Take them to the recovery chamber, Mr. Gracken. Make sure they get some rest. You stay behind a moment, would you, Mr. Gevins? There's someone I want you to meet. Farewell, the rest of you. Until tomorrow.
I still couldn't quite take in everything that had just been said. As we were led away, I tried to fit everything together in my mind. The situation was even worse than we had thought. Not only were we going to be brutally tortured by a sadistic madman, but our pain would lead to the downfall of our homeland. The war is lost, and all Ganvor will be swallowed up in misery. How unutterably depressing. We soon arrived at the recovery chamber, which was a great deal more comfortable than our cells, and we sat down morbidly on the soft carpeted floor.
"Well, men,"
said the General,
"it seems I have a profound apology to make. I've led you all to your doom. I've been a blind, deluded old fool. I cannot express how sorry I am."
"We can't believe it,"
said Algolian.
"I simply cannot believe it. Mr. Rhombus was Barracus all along. It beggars belief." "He seems such a decent chap,"
said Hectus.
"so kind and friendly."
"I'm surprised you find it all so difficult to accept," said Slank. "After all, you didn't find it hard to believe I was a villain. You all swallowed it without a moment's hesitation. Charming."
"I never trusted him," said Volko. "I never trust anyone who's cheery all the time. It's not natural."
"What are we going to do now, then?"
asked Hectus.
"Do you reckon we can get out of here?"
"Impossible," said McFiber.
"Any ideas, Quilk?"
asked Algolian.
"Nothing," said Quilk. "My mind's a blank. I think we're well and truly beaten, gents."
"All is lost," said Volko.
"Our fate is sealed. We cannot avoid death, friends, but we can choose the manner of our death. I, for one, would rather die fighting than rot away in one of Barracus's chambers. I say we make a final stand of defiance. Let us fight our way out of here and die an honourable death. What do you say, friends?"
"I agree, Volko," said Ramkarn. "It is the right thing to do. We must be stopping Barracus using us as his pawns. We must be depriving him of the use of our minds."
"Barracus will not conquer us," said Slank. "We are men of Galliminia, free, strong, steadfast, and indomitable. If I am not greatly mistaken, the man is half mad. This plan of his is nothing but sheer fantasy. He'll soon give up when he sees the unbreakable Gallimine spirit."
"I wish I shared your confidence, mate," said Quilk. "But who knows what endless torture will do to a man? We've only two options, gents. Lose our minds or lose our lives."
"Not so, Mr. Quilk," insisted Slank. "We're giving in too easily. There must be a third way. He who abandons hope hastens destruction. We must not resign ourselves to certain death."
"You're right, my dear Slank," said the General. "I've given up too quickly. We must pull ourselves together, men. We must hold fast to hope. You are wise beyond your years, Slank. Come on then, men. We need to start planning. Think, men, think."
"You agree with me, General?" said Slank in shocked tones. "You amaze me. One moment I'm a murdering reprobate, the next you applaud my prudent counsel. You are unfathomable, General."
"Here comes Gevins, sir,"
said McFiber, looking out through the door. The door opened, and two guards pushed Mr. Gevins into the chamber. He looked utterly distraught.
"What happened, Gevins?"
asked Algolian.
"What did Rhombus want with you?"
Gevins remained silent, slumped down against the wall, and held his head in his hands. He began to sob away quietly.
"What is it, brother?"
said Algolian, sitting down alongside him and gently touching his shoulder.
"What did Rhombus do?"
Gevins looked up, glanced around the room, and wiped away his tears.
"It was horrible,"
he sniffed, struggling to get the words out.
He took me to this chamber, this horrible, dreadful, gloomy chamber. He took me inside, and there she was. Marinda, my Marinda was there, all tied up and chained to the wall she was. He arranged for her to be shipped here from the slave market. That's where she'd been taken when she was captured. He's going to use her to get at me. He's going to make me do everything he wants, or she'll get tortured. He's evil, sir, totally evil. I'm going to kill him if I get the chance. I'll kill him with my own bare hands."
"Is there no end to this fellow's perversion?" said the General. "I think perhaps you're right, Mr. Gevins. I think perhaps this Barracus must be put to death. He must be stopped, men, even if it's at the cost of our lives. That must be our goal. That is our mission. For the good of Galliminia and the peace of all Ganvor, we must assassinate Merlin Rhombus."
I laid back my head against the wall and thought about the terrible options that lay before us. We could give in to Mr. Barracus, endure the most horrific torments of body and mind imaginable, and end up as his helpless mind-washed slaves. As soon as our usefulness expired, we would be mercilessly slaughtered. Ultimate end, death. Or we could make a futile attempt at escape, rise up against the hordes of armoured guards and get ourselves killed in the process. Ultimate end, death. Or we could plot the assassination of Barracus, seek out some way to dispose of him once and for all, and reap the inevitable penalty. Ultimate end, death. Mr. Volker was right. Death was unavoidable. All we could do was choose the manner of our death. What an atrociously ghastly situation. As I pondered the approaching certainty of a horrid and grisly end, my liver began to convulse violently. A cold rush of terror shot through my body, and I felt my blood turn to ice. I temporarily lost control of my sanity, and according to my comrades I became quite hysterical. Apparently I leapt to my feet, rushed to the door, screamed out vehemently, and started to bang my head repeatedly against the bars. I've absolutely no recollection of this occurrence, but this is what my comrades tell me. All I can remember is waking up back in the dungeon, securely chained to the wall, with my feet clad in irons. Attempting to divert my mind, I began to think of home and family. I thought of Willowdale, with its pretty thatched cottages and verdant meadows and my little blacksmith's forge. What a tragedy to think that it could soon be wrecked and ravaged by hordes of murdering Grochukans. I then began to wonder what might have happened to my 7 brothers. Were they still fighting in the ferocious battles of the West? Had any of them been captured by the enemy, perhaps even taken to Gruchengolga? Had any of them lost their lives? I might never find out. Inevitably my thoughts turned to Skylark Sakara, the woman responsible for stealing my heart. I wondered how she would look upon me if I ever returned. Would she see me in a different light? Would her opinion of me be altered? Would she view me as a brave and daring hero of war? Who was I fooling? She'll never like me. What could she possibly see in me? I have no charm, no prospects, no money, no valour. My pursuit of her is hopeless. With thoughts like these filling my mind, I soon plunged back into the depths of despair. Later that afternoon, our guard appeared and told us we were to report to Barracus once again.
"There's a special visitor waiting to see you,"
said the guard.
"Who is it?"
asked Algothian.
"You wait and see.
Said the guard.
Suffice it to say, it's a very distinguished personage indeed."
Once more we were taken through the winding passages and corridors of Gruchenulcus, and brought to the bright silver door of Mr. Barracus's office.
"Come in,"
called our captor. Upon entering the room, we observed 3 gentlemen gathered around Barracus's desk. On the left sat a tall, thin man with a small moustache, black wavy hair, and an irritating grin. He was wrapped in a thick grey cloak, and was sipping a cup of piping hot tea. On the right stood a small dwarf of a man, who was entirely bald apart from 2 tufts of greasy red hair. He had a very morose expression on his face, and 2 of his teeth protruded from his mouth like fangs. In the middle
was a man even taller than the first, at least 7 foot by my reckoning. He had severe frowning eyebrows, horrible piercing eyes, and a long scar on his neck. My liver shivered within me as I saw him. It was Prince Vorkrond, Lord of Gruken Golga.
"Welcome back, my friends," said Baracus, rising from his seat. "Allow me to introduce our prestigious visitors. His Royal Highness, I believe you have met. On the left is Mr. Clestus of Carcanva, chief adviser to the Prince. On the right is Mr. Smibbles of Glork, personal manservant to his Highness. They come on important business."
"I trust you are settling in well to your new quarters," smiled the Prince, biting his lip ever so slightly.
"It's not quite as stylish as Golga, but it has its own unique charm, does it not?"
"Enough of the sarcasm," said the General. "What do you want with us?"
"I see you have lost none of your forthrightness, General," said the Prince. "I shall come straight to the point. To put it frankly, gentlemen, my father is a gloomy old pessimist. He does not think we will win the war. He has lost heart. But now he has found out about our experiment. We tried to keep it hidden from him, but word has got to him. And since he has now grown so desperate, he has allowed us to continue. But he does not much fancy our chances of success. He has little confidence in Mr. Baracus, so he wants to cover himself. He knows that if we lose, and you Galamines discover we have broken the sacred codes of war, we will pay a heavy price. Any peace treaty will be even more stringent and merciless, and our defeat will be all the more humiliating. This he wants to avoid at all costs. As a result, gentlemen, he will not permit us to proceed any further until you have signed this official document. It is a solemn statement to the effect that you have not in any way been harmed, mistreated, or abused during your captivity. We must have your signature, General, before we can go any further. Then, if we end up losing the war, we can produce the document, and our dignity will be preserved, and we'll make sure you're no longer alive to contradict it."
"This is outrageous," shouted the General. "I will never sign such a document."
"You will," said Prince Vorkrond. "For if you do not, your men will be shot one by one. Show him your weapon, Mr. Clestus."
Mr. Clestus drew back his cloak and revealed a strange, odd-looking weapon, the likes of which I had never seen before. It looked like a long silver pipe fixed to a black metal handle with some sort of firing mechanism at the joint. He pointed it threateningly towards us and smiled smugly.
"A gift from General Vralin," said the Prince. "It's still in the development stage, but I'm told it's marvellously effective. Swords and spears are no match for this little beauty. Show them how it works, Clestus."
"With pleasure, your Highness," grinned Clestus. He loaded a small metal shell into the pipe, aimed it just above my head, and pulled the firing mechanism. With a blast of smoke and a terrifying bang, the shell shot out over my head and straight into the wall behind me. I couldn't stop shaking.
"Hand me the document, Smibbles," said the Prince.
"Right away, sir,"
said Smibbles, drawing out a parchment from under his tunic.
"Quill, Smibbles," said the Prince.
Smibbles removed a long green feather from his pocket and passed it up to his master.
"This is a centurion's feather," growled the Prince, clipping Smibbles forcefully over the head. "How dare you use it for a pen?"
"Sorry, sir,"
said Smibbles, rubbing his head.
"Here's the yellow one."
"Now then, General," said the Prince, "do I have your cooperation?"
"You do not,"
said the General emphatically. The Prince nodded at Clestus, who promptly loaded his weapon and fired another shell. This time he shot it straight into my arm. I fell to the ground and howled with pain. Blood poured out onto my sleeve, and I almost fainted at the sight.
"Next time it will be his head," said the Prince. "Do I have your cooperation, General?"
The General glared furiously at the Prince.
"I would gladly sacrifice myself," he said, "but I cannot allow you to murder my men in this cold-blooded fashion. I will play it your way, Vorkrond. I'll sign your precious document."
Wonderful, said the prince. If you'd kindly fill in the date as well, it's the 18th of Glestin. That's wonderful. I'll take this back to my father as soon as possible. You can begin your experiments right away, Baracus. That is good news, smiled Baracus. We'd best get Mr. Tando to the medical ward. As for the rest of you, I think it's about time for your daily exercise. Take them out to the yard, Mr. Kraken. Thank you for your kind cooperation, my friends.
2 of Baracus's guards rushed me over to the medical ward, where my arm was promptly treated and bandaged. I was left to recover on a hard, creaking bed, while the others went out to enjoy some fresh air and exercise in the yard. Apparently, the wound wasn't very serious, but it didn't half hurt. Deciding to make the most of having a bed to sleep on, I managed to doze off for a bit. However, it wasn't very long before I was disturbed by the noise of the ward door creaking loudly open. I looked up and thought I must be dreaming. There in the doorway, dressed in his unmistakable orange waistcoat and dark green checkered trousers, was Professor Jaggles.
"Mr. Tando!"
he cried excitedly.
"Delighted to see you."
"What are you doing here?" I asked, half wondering whether I was addressing a figment of my imagination. "Been caught as well, have you?"
"Not at all, my dear fellow, not at all,"
said the Professor.
"Quite the reverse, I assure you. I have evaded capture, Mr. Tando. I am a free man."
"You're not a Grochucan as well, are you?" I said.
"A Grochucan?" exclaimed the Professor. "What in Ganvor do you mean? As well as whom, my dear fellow? Perhaps I ought to explain myself. I've been searching for you a lot everywhere. May I take a seat, Mr. Tando?"
Without waiting for an answer, the Professor sat himself down on the end of my bed and began to recount his adventures with the usual animated gestures and excitement.
"Well, my dear fellow," he began, "the last time you saw me I was being taken prisoner by those rotten pirates. What a rough and ill-mannered lot they were! Barbarians! One by one they returned from the battle, bruised and battered and somewhat humiliated, and began to treat me in the most discourteous of manners. That Captain Culverin was the worst of them all, an absolute rotter, despicable. Anyway, they hadn't been back long when we came under attack from that frightful Crondian octopus, the one that nearly killed Mr. Argothian. Well, it started thrashing its hideous tentacles onto the boat, and nearly turned it over a couple of times. Terrifying. Anyway, said octopus was in turn being hunted by a pack of Caldamines, who rather fancied it for their supper. Have you ever met a Caldamine, Mr. Tando? A most peculiar people. Blue skin, webbed feet, luminous eyes, and razor-sharp teeth. Extraordinary. Well, a group of these Caldamines killed the Crondian octopus with their spears and rescued me from my captors. Next thing I know, I'm being taken down beneath the waves to their underwater city. A most impressive sight, you know. Jaw-dropping. An enormous network of pipes, domes, and spheres made entirely of glass and stretching across the seabed for miles and miles. You may well be wondering, of course, how I avoided drowning. Well, we travelled by Glombus, my dear fellow, a large sphere of glass pulled by a great marine lizard, a most effective means of transport. Anyway, I was taken immediately to see their king, explained to him my story, and was escorted back to the coast of the Empire with a most gratifying swiftness. I had a most ingenious idea for getting back to the rest of you, you see. I decided I would fly. Do you remember Amvor, Mr. Tando, the dragon I rescued from the Gregomines? I thought it was time for him to return a favour. I sought him out on the plains of Stevros and explained my predicament to him. He was more than happy to help. He promptly summoned a meeting of all his dragon friends and asked if anyone had spotted a group of Galamines. One of them replied that she'd seen some in the vicinity of Grucan Ulcus. So Amvor very kindly agreed to fly me over here this afternoon and landed me in one of the windows. I've been searching for you lot ever since.
"That must be a dangerous business," I said. "Haven't any guards seen you?"
"Of course not, Mr. Tando," said the Professor. "I have been most careful. I do work for the Intelligence Division. Espionage is one of my special skills. Now then, Mr. Tando, Amvor will soon be coming back for me. I'd better dash. I want you to pass on a message to all the others.
According to a notice in the guards' mess, prisoners have an hour's exercise every evening out in the yard. Tell the others I'll be waiting for you there tomorrow night. Amvor will pick us all up and whisk us away to freedom. We're going to get you out of here."
With a final salute and a warm smile, the professor sped out of the room like a hurricane and disappeared down the corridor. I wondered whether it had all been an hallucination. It seemed too good to be true. Was there really a way out of this dreadful place? Was the professor to be trusted? Or was this just another part of Barracus's wicked schemes? An hour later, I was escorted back to the dungeons, and I then endured one of the worst nights in living memory. I cannot even begin to describe how horrible it was. There was the freezing cold temperature, which made me shake and shiver through the entire night. There was the desperately uncomfortable, hard, cold, stony floor, which made me sore all over. There was the bitter, raging hunger, which made my stomach ache like it's never ached before. There were the horrid, vile rats that scuttled across the floor, and the numerous menacing spiders that crept up and down the walls. There were strange, disturbing noises that made my liver tremble, distant screams, ghostly howls, and eerie laughter. Worst of all, there was the dreadful anxiety about tomorrow that seized hold of my body and shredded my nerves to pieces. I did not in fact get a single wink of sleep all night. Morning broke. Would it be another day of terror or a day of triumph? Only time would tell. I waited anxiously in the cell, thinking through how I might persuade the General that I had seen Professor Jaggles. It seemed such an unlikely story. It seemed like an age before Mr. Gracken finally came to the door and announced that lunch was ready. I chose a seat next to the General and decided to come straight out with it. "I have a message from Professor Jaggles," I said.
"Jaggles?" cried the General. "Where in Ganvor did you see him?"
"He came into the medical ward last night," I explained. "He's got a plan of escape."
"Oh, yes," said the General, not looking very convinced. "What does he have in mind?"
"Escape by dragon," I said, conscious that my words did not sound particularly credible. "He'll be waiting for us this evening."
"Barkus up to his old tricks again, I see," said Ram Khan. "I'm afraid he must have been slipping something in your water, Mr. Tando. You've been hallucinating."
"I don't think so," I said. "I thought that myself at first, but the more I think about it, the more convinced I am it really was Professor Jaggles."
"It could have been Barracus in disguise," said Hectus.
"Or maybe it was all a dream," said Algothian.
"No, I'm sure it was real," I insisted. "He'll be waiting for us out in the exercise yard."
"Your mind's playing tricks on you," said McFiber. "Think about it logically. How in Ganvor could Jaggles have got here? How could he have got past the guards? Where did he get a dragon from? And why would he single you out as his messenger?"
"He escaped from the pirates," I said, "and flew here on Amvor, the dragon he rescued in the mountains. I know it sounds crazy, but this could be our only chance."
"It does sound rather unbelievable," said the General, "but I can't think why Barracus would make you hallucinate something like that. What do you think, Slank?"
"Me, sir?" said Slank. "You actually wish for my opinion? I am astounded. Mr. Tando's story may be nothing more than fiction, sir, but we have nothing to lose if we give him the benefit of the doubt. We'll be out in the yard tonight anyway. I say we make ready for escape."
"Quite right," said Quilk. "We'd be mad to miss a chance of escape. Never miss an opportunity."
"Madness," said McFiber.
"I can't believe you're actually listening to him. It's quite clear he's gone half mad."
"I'll be the judge of that, McFiber," said the General. "I've already misjudged one of our men. We shall give you the benefit of the doubt tonight, Tando."
"Here comes Mr. Gracken," whispered Algothian, "heading right towards us."
"First subjects are to report to Mr. Barracus immediately after lunch," said Gracken. "Mr. Ramkhan Zebaniah, Mr. Sparrowhawk Gevins, and General Montagolin."
"General Lord Montagolin, actually," said the General. "Try to get it right, man."
"The rest of you will have 1 hour in the recreation chamber," said Gracken. "Eat up, gentlemen."
Our doom begins, said Gevins mournfully. I dread to think what will happen to us.
Courage, Gevins, said the General. We may be out of here by tonight.
What about Marinda? Said Gevins. I can't leave her behind. Who knows what Barracus might do to her?
I'm sure we'll think of a way to rescue her,
said the General. Fantasy, muttered McFiber. Sheer fantasy. This place will be our tomb, gentlemen. There is no light at the end of the tunnel this time. Our time is up. The recreation chamber turned out to be a rather bland and empty room not far from Barracus's office. There was very little to do in the way of recreation, so we passed the time swapping stories of our wartime adventures. Volko's turned out to be the most interesting. As a captain in the Marduran army, he had led a daring raid on a Grochukan camp, killed an enemy general, and was promptly captured, barely escaping with his life. He held us all in rapt attention as he recounted his exploits in vivid detail. After a while, Barracus made an appearance, and started amassing information for his records. He had us all measured, weighed, and rigorously examined by a doctor. Everything was jotted down in a bulky red file, held aloft by the diminutive Mr. Smibbles.
Now then, said Barracus, 1 or 2 questions for you all.
Why should we answer your questions? Asked Volko, speaking up for the rest of the group.
Because if you do not, said Barracus, you will suffer.
We're going to suffer already, said Volko. Your threats are futile.
Not all of you will suffer, smiled Barracus. I don't need you all. I have decided to let one of you go free. Not free from captivity, of course, free from my experiments. Whichever of you I deem to be the most compliant and cooperative, I shall reward with an easy time. That'll secure your obedience, my friends. You can't afford to miss the opportunity to escape my torments.
You're a warped man, Mr. Rhombus, said Volko.
Volko,
said Barracus, shaking his head.
You're supposed to be winning my favour, not insulting me.
I do not fear your experiments, said Volko. We Marduarians are unbreakable.
Not all your friends are so brave, Mr. Volko, replied Barracus. I can see the terror in their eyes. I will have your cooperation, my friends. I want a complete record of all your personal details, medical histories, and other particulars. We'll start with you, Mr. Tando. Date of birth?
I hesitated, not wishing to incur Volko's displeasure, yet finding the prospect of avoiding torture irresistibly attractive. On the one hand, it didn't seem very noble to compete against my comrades for Barracus's approval. On the other hand, we could well have been out of his clutches by the evening. There again, the escape might fail and put us in even more trouble. As all these thoughts whirred around in my mind, I began to sweat profusely. At length, I swallowed hard and blurted out my answer. The 10th of Vowrin, 1256, I said.
Excellent, said Barracus with a gleam in his eye.
Coward, grunted Volko, staring at me with disgust. Barracus went on to interrogate me for at least 10 minutes before he turned to his next victim, Mr. Slank. In the end, everyone, except Algothian, Volko, and McFiber, yielded to Barracus's questioning. He wrote down all the answers in his file, thanked us heartily, and departed from the room.
Unbelievable, said Volko. We're all competing against each other now, every man for himself. I'm appalled. What does it matter? Said Quilk. We may be out of here by tonight. No point making him needlessly cross.
Dignified defiance, said Volko. That's the only way to behave in captivity. You Galamines make me sick. The rest of the afternoon was spent back in the cells, where I passed the time reading a book lent to me by McFiber. Ramcarn, Gevins, and the General were all returned at about the 12th hour, all looking rather worse for wear.
I dreaded to think what terrors might have befallen them. I comforted myself with the prospect of the Professor's imminent return. I kept asking Hectus to consult his pocket time-teller, but the hours wore on with painful slowness. At last Mr. Gracken appeared at the door and summoned us to our feet.
Rise and shine,
he called.
Exercise time.
I cannot describe how wonderful it was finally to get a blast of clean, fresh air. It was a beautiful, cool evening outside, and the sky was reddened by the setting sun. All the other prisoners were out as well, and there must have been at least 30 armed guards encircling the yard. Getting out would not be very easy, even with the aid of a dragon.
"How are you, sir?"
said Algothian, looking with great concern at the general.
"You look dreadful."
"I've been better,"
said the general.
"I'm throbbing all over. Those guards really are brutes. But this is just the beginning. Things will get far worse. I'm very concerned, men. I'm not as young as I was. I'm not sure how much my body can take. We mustn't take it for granted that I'll survive the experiments. What would happen to me if I were to die? Who would take my place as leader? Who would step into my shoes and lead you home? I need to promote one of you to the rank of sergeant."
"I am already a captain, General," said Volko. "I would be the natural successor."
"You have no authority over Galamenes,"
said the general.
"That's the trouble."
"I am the next oldest after you, sir," said McFiber. "I am the obvious choice." "Age alone is not a sufficient qualification for leadership," said Slank. "Wisdom, courage, honour, resilience, these are the marks of a natural-born leader." "And I suppose you're the one who fits the bill," said McFiber.
"Let's not start arguing, men,"
said the general.
"I shall consider the matter very carefully. In the meantime, let us be optimistic and hope the Professor arrives."
"No sign of him yet,"
said Hectus. "Of course not," said McFiber. "He's not coming, that's why."
"That remains to be seen,"
said the general.
"There's no harm in waiting for him. We'd best stick together, men."
10 minutes passed, and there was still no glimpse of Professor Jaggles. I began to lose heart again. Maybe I had just imagined him after all. Maybe it was all a dream. Or perhaps he'd been held up by some hindrance or other. Perhaps he'd been killed in his efforts to enter the castle. Even if he did arrive, a successful getaway seemed very unlikely. How would all of us get onto the dragon without being stopped? What about all the guards? Escape began to seem impossible. How daft I'd been to think we could get out. Torment and torture was all that lay before us. As I was thinking these thoughts, horror of horrors, one of the guards started coming towards us. Had he noted our suspicious behaviour? Was he going to summon the next victims to Barracus's chambers? He marched right towards me and seized hold of my arm.
"Did anyone order a dragon?"
he chuckled. It was Professor Jaggles. What joy! What elation! "I don't believe it!" exclaimed McFiber. "It's really you!" The Professor smiled a broad, hearty smile, and then began to make a distinctive whistling noise.
"Brace yourselves, gentlemen,"
he said.
"Here comes Amvor."
What followed was the most heartening, breathtaking, glorious scene I'd witnessed for months and months. High above the walls of the courtyard, a mighty black shadow swooped across the setting sun, circled the castle twice, and shot down towards us at breakneck speed. Wreaths of flame poured out from its nostrils and scorched a dozen guards. A massive cloud of smoke enveloped the whole courtyard, and shouts and screams echoed through the air. "All aboard!" shouted the Professor. "All aboard!" Without delay, 10 of us scrambled up onto the enormous scaly back of the dragon and grabbed hold of its spiny crest. Only Gevins remained on the ground.
"Come on, Gevins,"
called Algothian.
"Up you get."
"I can't leave her behind," said Gevins, presumably referring to Merinda.
"Don't be a fool, Gevins,"
said the general.
"Leaving here is the best way to end her pain. Once you're gone, Barracus will have no reason to torture her. She'll be better off if you leave Gevins. Up you get!"
Out of the smoke, 2 guards came running towards us with drawn swords. Amvor struck them down with one swipe of his foot, but 3 more appeared in their place. Gevins grabbed the sword from one of the fallen men and swung it vigorously back and forth to keep the guards at bay. "Go!" he called. "Quick, before it's too late!" Amvor crouched down, sprang forth into the sky, and soared over the walls of the castle. Looking back down, I could see many figures rushing out into the courtyard. Among them, I could just about make out Barracus, Vorkrond, and Clestus. Word had reached them of our daring escape. Gevins was doing his best to fend them off, but it was unlikely he could hold out much longer. I saw Clestus raise his weapon into the air and fire a shell. His aim was impeccable, and the shell came whistling through the air and straight into Amvor's leg. He roared with pain, but kept his course. A second shell was fired into his leg, and Amvor began to falter.
"Come on, Amvor,"
called Jaggles.
"you can make it."
But it was too much for the dragon. He started to lose height. A third shell sent him hurtling to the ground and crashing into the hillside. We were all thrown off his back and onto the thick brown grass. I looked back. We were out of Gruken Ulcus, but only just. Barely 100 yards lay between us and the castle. Hordes of guards would soon be swarming over the hillside. We were on the run once again, and this time it was for real.